I'm 74 years old, and all my life I believed I had raised a good man. But that belief shattered one morning when I opened my bank app and saw that every single dollar was gone. I thought it had to be a mistake. I blinked a few times, refreshed the screen, but the numbers didn't change. Not only was my balance zero, it was negative. I was overdrawn by $72. My heart started racing. I scrolled through the transactions and saw it. One huge transfer. Every penny I'd ever saved, gone in one hit. $473.74, wiped out. I called the bank right away, shaking as I pressed through those endless phone menus. Finally, a woman named Terry picked up. She explained the transfer had been authorized by someone who shared the account with me. My stomach turned cold. The only other person on that account was my son, Daniel. I asked her to double-check. She typed for a moment and then gently confirmed it. "Yes, ma'am. Your son made the transfer last Thursday." That was 4 days ago. 4 days where he acted completely normal, like nothing had happened. I hung up, my hands trembling so badly I dropped my phone twice while trying to text him. No reply. I called, straight to voicemail. I sat at the kitchen table gripping my coffee mug like it was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. Finally, he called me that evening. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just asked him why. He said, so casually, "I needed capital, Mom. It's not like you were using it. I've got an opportunity that could change everything." I asked him what kind of opportunity, and he started rambling about crypto and trading and some nonsense I couldn't even understand. I told him that money was for my future, to fix my roof, get hearing aids, maybe even the dental implants I'd been putting off for years. He laughed, actually laughed. "Come on, Mom," he said. "You live like a monk. You don't even touch half the stuff you save for. Let me grow it." That's when it hit me. This wasn't my son talking. This was someone who saw me not as a mother, but as a bank, a backup plan. And now that I had nothing left, I was just in the way. When I told him he had no right, he said, "Well, technically it was a joint account, like that made it okay." Then he added, "I'm not going to argue. I'm busy. We'll talk later," and hung up before I could even say his name. I just sat there, completely numb. After a while, I walked over to the medicine drawer. I counted my pills, 14 days of heart medication, 12 thyroid pills, no money left for refills, no backup savings, nothing. I opened the folder where I kept all my financial documents, hoping maybe, just maybe, I'd forgotten about some hidden account, some overlooked check, some miracle. But no, it was really all gone. 30 years of saving. Every birthday card with cash I never spent. Every overtime shift I picked up at the hospital. All of it vanished with one click. And by the one person I trusted most. I tried to convince myself he'd come to his senses, that he'd send the money back, that he just panicked or made a dumb mistake. But deep down, I knew. He took it. On purpose. And he wasn't sorry. And that's the moment something inside me broke. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just quietly rewrote my will. And I made sure my son would live to regret ever thinking he could steal my future and walk away smiling. He knew I wouldn't stop him. He knew I loved him too much to ever imagine he could do something like this. And that's the worst part. Not just the money, but the betrayal. I gave everything I had to raise that boy. Now, the same child I carried through sleepless nights, school plays, and scraped knees had left me with nothing but empty pill bottles, unpaid bills, and a kind of heartbreak no mother should ever have to feel. That night I couldn't sleep, not just from the pain, though it sat heavy in my chest like a wet blanket. No, I was lying awake doing math in my head. The kind of math that makes your stomach twist and your brain spin. I had just over $800 left in my checking account, all from Social Security, and about $120 on an old grocery gift card I'd been saving for Christmas dinner. Rent was due in 12 days. My medications would run out even sooner. I stared at the ceiling fan, going over the numbers like someone already deep in debt at a poker table, knowing she's lost, but still hoping for a miracle. In the morning, I skipped breakfast, took only half my pills, hoping to stretch them out. I went to the pharmacy, praying I had at least one refill left, and maybe Medicare would help cover it. But the man behind the counter just checked the computer and shook his head. "Your plan doesn't kick in for another 3 weeks, ma'am," he said, like he was reading the weather forecast. I asked him how much it would cost out of pocket. He typed for a few seconds, looked up, and said, $381. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so far out of reach it felt like a cruel joke. That afternoon, I heated up a can of ravioli and cut my pills again, this time into thirds. I tried calling Daniel one last time, not to beg, just to ask if he could help with my medicine. I told myself maybe he didn't understand how serious this was. Maybe if I explained that my heart could go into arrhythmia without these pills, he'd wake up and realize what he'd done. He finally answered, and sounded annoyed like I was a stranger bothering him. "What now?" he snapped, like I was some random caller he wanted to hang up on. I pushed my pride down and told him I was trying to get my medication. He went quiet for a second, then said, "Look, I told you I'm out of money too. My startup's in burn mode. I'm not your ATM." I said I wasn't asking for a handout, just a little help until I could figure something out. And that's when he said it. "Your health isn't my problem, Mom. You're an adult. You made your choices." I held the phone like it had just burned me. My mouth opened, but no words came out. I didn't say anything. I just hung up. Back in the kitchen, I opened the cabinets. Half a box of saltines, a dented can of green, beans, some instant coffee. I thought about selling my old recliner, maybe listing it online. But then I pictured myself trying to carry it out for pickup and gave up. That night, I didn't take any pills. My chest already felt tight, maybe from the stress, maybe from skipping doses, but I didn't want to burn through the little I had left. I went to bed with my stomach growling so loud it echoed in the silence. At 3 a.m., I woke up dizzy. I got up to use the bathroom, but the hallway spun around me. I tried to steady myself on the wall, missed, and crashed down hard, scraping my arm on the hallway table. I laid there for a few seconds, breath knocked out of me, thinking, is this it? Is this how people get found days later, curled up next to a spilled cat dish and a blinking microwave clock? I pulled myself up, cleaned the cut, bandaged my arm, and sat back down in the kitchen. Same chair, same silence, same pain. I looked around, at the curtains I once took pride in, the family photos that used to bring me joy, the neatly stacked canned soups I'd always made sure to stock up on. And I felt nothing, just shame. I raised a son who could leave me like this. Who could steal everything I had and not even care? What kind of mother does that? I told myself maybe he wasn't evil, just broken. Maybe the world twisted him into someone I didn't recognize, but when I closed my eyes, all I could hear was his voice saying, "Your health isn't my problem." And right then, something inside me changed. No more feeling sorry for myself. No more waiting for an apology that was never coming. I'd spent 74 years trying to keep the peace, to make everyone else happy, to prove I was still useful. But I was done with that. If Daniel thought I was just going to fade away quietly, he didn't know who he was dealing with. The next morning I opened the windows wide. I opened a window to let in some fresh air because the house was starting to smell musty, like old sheets and soup from a can. But as soon as the breeze hit my face, I realized just how weak I felt. My body was shaky, like my bones had given up on holding me up. I made myself a cup of instant coffee with the last bit of powder, no milk left, and sat down at the kitchen table. I wasn't counting money, but I started looking around at things. Stuff I might be able to sell or trade just to get a little cash for my medicine. I didn't have much, no real jewelry except my wedding ring. I hadn't taken it off since 1986, but now I slipped it off and held it in my hand. Inside, it still had that little engraving. Always us. What a joke that turned out to be. I wrapped the ring in a tissue and tucked it into my purse. Then I pulled my old sewing machine out of the closet, the one I used to make Daniel's Halloween. Costumes when he still thought being Batman or Buzz Lightyear was the coolest thing in the world. I stuffed it into a laundry bag. I used the last bit of credit on my prepaid phone to call a cab and asked the driver to take me to that pawn shop down on Jefferson. The place smelled like dust, sweat, and sadness. I gave the guy the ring first, trying not to let my feelings show. He looked at it like it was a spare tire and said, "I can give you 70. Just like that. I didn't argue. Next, I handed him the sewing machine. "This is vintage, you know," I said, hoping he'd care. He just shrugged and said, "Maybe to someone's grandma. I'll give you 25. So now I had $95. I folded the money slowly and tucked it into my bra. I didn't trust my purse anymore. On the way out, I saw a woman trying to sell her flat-screen TV. She started crying when they only offered her 30. I didn't say anything. What could I say? These days, people only care about tears if they go viral. I walked 2 blocks to the same pharmacy because I needed my pills right away. But halfway there, the sidewalk started to feel like it was tilting under me. Not really, but that's how it felt. My heart was pounding out of rhythm, like it was trying to send out a warning. I stopped, leaned against a bus stop pole, and tried to catch my breath. People walked right past me like I wasn't even there. A teenager looked at me for a second, then looked away. I tried to keep walking, but the sunlight suddenly felt too bright, like someone cranked up the world's brightness. My knees gave out, and I fell against a bench, knocking over a man's coffee. He cursed under his breath but didn't help. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't even open my purse. That's when a woman walked up to me. She looked about. 27, wearing scrubs and holding a sandwich bag. She asked if I was okay. I tried to say yes, but no words came out. Before I could stop her, she called 911. 10 minutes later, I was in an ambulance, apologizing over and over, even though no one seemed mad. At the hospital, they checked my heart, asked me about my medications. I told them the truth, well, most of it. I didn't mention Daniel. The nurses looked at me with that quiet, gentle look that says everything they won't say out loud. They kept me overnight to keep an eye on me and said they could connect me to some social services. I told them I had someone I could call. That wasn't true, but I didn't want to admit that the only person I had left was the one who walked away. When they let me go the next morning, they gave me a cab voucher and a brochure with a list of local food banks. I came home, still wearing those soft hospital socks, and sat on the couch staring at that brochure like it was written in another language. I'd never been on this side of things before. I used to be the one donating canned food at church, never the one receiving it. I thought about calling Daniel again, but the memory of him laughing the last time I asked him for help made my stomach turn. I looked around my house, pictures of his 5th birthday, his high school graduation, the letter from his college acceptance framed in the hallway. And just like that, it all felt like a museum of someone I used to believe in. That's when something in me shifted. If he wanted to treat me like I was already dead to him, then fine. But I wasn't going to fade away quietly, not like he expected. I wasn't giving up. I'd smile, I'd nod, I'd play along, and then I'd survive. I decided right then that I wasn't going to let him win, not after everything he'd done. If Daniel thought he was going to walk away with whatever I had left, he had another thing coming. I was done giving pieces of my life to someone who didn't even care if I lived or died. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at a pile of papers, my hospital discharge forms, the pawn shop ticket, and that crumpled brochure from the food bank. That's when it really hit me. How little I seemed to matter to the People who shared my blood, and how much I still mattered to complete strangers. Like that young woman in scrubs who knelt beside me on the street without hesitation, or the nurse who snuck me an extra pudding cup because I reminded her of her grandma. That's when I realized something big. Kindness doesn't come from DNA. It comes from who a person is inside. And my son? He didn't have that in him anymore. Maybe he never did. So I opened the drawer where I kept my old will. It was still official, still notarized, still naming Daniel as the only person who would inherit anything when I died. I hadn't touched it since 2009, back when I still believed he'd be the one holding my hand at the end, not the one ignoring my calls while I collapsed on a bench and sold my wedding ring just to survive. I stared at that will and thought, no. This is not how my story ends. Not with him getting everything, not with him walking away richer after bleeding me dry. That's when I picked up the phone and called the only person who had checked on me, without being asked, my neighbor, Linda. She's the kind of woman who slips homemade lasagna or green beans into your fridge when she knows you haven't been eating. She once offered to take me grocery shopping and never brought it up again when I said no. She never pried, but somehow always knew when I needed help, even when I was too proud to ask. I told her I needed a favor, something that required trust, and a little bit of quiet revenge. She didn't ask questions. She just nodded and said, "All right then, let's do it." By noon, we were in her car, driving to a small law office she found through a friend from church. The lawyer's name was Cheryl. She looked like someone who had been through 3 divorces and won every single one. When I told her my story, how Daniel drained my bank account, laughed when I asked for help, and told me my health wasn't his problem, her expression didn't change. She just listened with calm, steady eyes. Then she said, "You're going to need more than a will, honey. You need a real plan." Over the next 2 hours, Cheryl walked me through everything: a new living trust, power of attorney, medical instructions, and most importantly, a brand new will. This one left everything to Linda: the house, the car, the little bit of life, insurance, the old furniture, and maybe most important of all, my story. I made Cheryl promise that if anything ever happened to me, she'd make sure Linda told it, not for sympathy, but as a warning. Because too many moms give too much to sons who turn out to be leeches, wearing their baby photos like masks. When we finished signing everything, Cheryl asked if I wanted to make a video, just in case. So I sat down in front of her webcam and told the truth. No tears, no shaking voice, just calm, honest words. I said how I'd given Daniel everything, how he took and took until there was nothing left, how he abandoned me, and how I was now choosing, freely and fully, to leave whatever I had to someone who showed up when it mattered. Linda drove me home afterward. We didn't talk much on the way. We just sat in her driveway for a while with the engine off. Then she looked over at me and asked, "You sure you're ready for this?" I told her, "I'm not sure about anything anymore, except one thing. Next time Daniel shows up, it'll be on my terms, not his." She didn't look at me with pity or worry. She looked at me with respect. And that meant more than any apology I knew I'd never get. Because now I had something I hadn't had in a long time. A plan, a secret, and the power to decide how this story ends. And for the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt like I had control again. It had been just under 3 weeks since I changed the will when I heard the knock on the door. It wasn't the friendly kind. It was the kind that makes your stomach twist before your brain even catches up. And when I opened the door and saw, it was Daniel. Standing there at my door with a duffel bag slung over one shoulder and that same smug grin he wore on his high school graduation day, like the world owed him something just for showing up. But I didn't feel angry. I felt something, colder, deeper. It was disgust, and it settled in my bones. Still, I kept my face calm. I'd played this moment over in my mind too many times to mess it up now. I opened the screen door and asked, What happened? Like I didn't already know. He shrugged like it was nothing, told me his startup lost its funding, his investors backed out, and his apartment was temporarily unavailable. Which, in Daniel's speak, probably meant he'd been evicted. Then came the line I knew was coming. I just need a few days, Mom, to regroup. Every part of me wanted to shut that door in his face, but instead I stepped aside and let him in. Because if this was going to end the way it needed to, I had to let him crash. And I had to be there to watch it from the inside. He walked past me without even glancing at the photo of us at Disneyland that hung on the wall, just went straight to the kitchen, opened the fridge like he still owned the place, grabbed one of the sodas Linda had left, and popped it open like it was his. That moment sealed it for me. I had made the right decision about the will. Daniel wasn't here out of love. He was here because he had nowhere else left to go. I was his last option, his final safety net. I told him he could stay in the spare room, the one with the creaky twin bed and the old desk from the 80s. I said 5 nights. That's it. And he smiled like it was no big deal, said, "Of course. Thanks, you're the best." Like it was a line he'd practiced. That night, while he snored down the hall, I took out the hidden camera Linda gave me. It looked like a regular digital photo frame, but it had a motion sensor and recorded everything. I placed it on the mantel, pointed at the hallway and living room. If Daniel was going to try anything sneaky this time, I wasn't going to rely on gut feelings or guesswork. I wanted proof. The next few days played out exactly like I expected. He lounged around the house, took long showers, left wet towels everywhere, borrowed my car without asking, always whispering into his phone like he had secrets worth sharing. And every night he asked about money, about bills, about my health, his voice dripping with fake concern. I gave him vague answers, told him I was managing. I never mentioned the new will, or Linda, or Cheryl. Not one word about the trust or the video that could bury him if he ever tried anything again. But I watched him. He started poking around, first in the kitchen drawers, then the hallway filing cabinet. Always casual, like he was looking for stamps or tape. But I saw that old glint in his eyes, that same little flicker he used to get. As a kid, right before he'd lie about something dumb, like sneaking candy from the pantry. By the 4th night, I caught him in my bedroom. He thought I was asleep. I wasn't. But I didn't say a word. Instead, I got up the next morning, made pancakes, and asked if he wanted bacon too. He smiled and said, "You're the best." And I smiled right back, thinking, "Go ahead, Daniel. Dig your own grave." That evening, I watched the footage from the hidden camera. There he was, holding the envelope labeled Final Will and Testament, updated. Flipping through it slowly, his mouth slightly open, reading every word like he was trying to rewrite it just by staring hard enough. And when he finished, he didn't look shocked. He didn't look hurt. He looked furious. Real, raw, unfiltered rage. Like some spoiled prince who just found out the crown was going to the maid instead. He slammed the folder shut, shoved it back in the drawer, and grabbed his phone. I heard him muttering, "She's gone crazy. This has to be undone." I didn't need to hear more to know what came next. He was going to try to gaslight me, twist things, maybe even threaten me. But it didn't matter. I had the footage. The papers, the law, and most importantly, the truth. And what Daniel didn't realize yet. By walking back into my house, he handed me the one thing I still needed, the end of his story. He was delivered right to my doorstep, wrapped in a duffel bag full of dirty clothes and desperation. The next morning, I acted like nothing had happened. I asked Daniel if he wanted eggs or just toast. He didn't even look up. "Toast," he said, eyes glued to his phone, fingers tapping like he was searching for answers that weren't there. I noticed the way he avoided my eyes, the way he kept glancing toward the hallway drawer. I knew exactly what was running through his mind because I'd watched the footage again last night. I saw him reading the new will, saw him whispering on the phone to that shady friend of his, the one who claims to know estate lawyers, plotting, scheming, like he was planning some hit job on my dignity. What he didn't realize is the woman he thought he was up against, the one who used to cry when he forgot Mother's Day. She doesn't live here anymore. I was already 5 moves ahead. After breakfast, I told him I needed a nap, went to my room. But instead of lying down, I pulled up the camera feed on my laptop and waited. 5 minutes later, I heard the hallway floor creak. There he was, on the screen again. This time, he had a notepad. He was copying things from the trust documents, like he was preparing a legal ambush. Then came something new. He took out his phone and started snapping pictures, probably to send to one of his so-called experts, hoping someone could find a way to undo it all. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Cheryl already told me everything was bulletproof, witnessed, time-stamped, stored in 3 separate places. My video testimony alone would end any argument before it started. Still, I didn't confront him. Not yet. Letting him think he was smart was the only way he'd keep walking deeper into the trap. That afternoon, he cornered me in the living room. His voice syrupy, fake concern dripping off every word. "Mom, how are you feeling? Have you thought about doing a little financial cleanup? I could help with paperwork while I'm here." I nodded slowly, pretending to be flattered. Told him I appreciated the offer. Said I'd think about it. Even told him I'd consider reviewing a few old documents together if he could be patient. He smiled like a snake who'd found an open window. "Of course, Mom. I just want to help." Then he disappeared back into the guest room, probably to call whoever he thought could still save his sinking future. And by then, I wasn't even angry anymore. I was disappointed. Because this wasn't just greed. This was something worse, a total lack of shame. And in that moment, I realized something I should have seen a long time ago. I hadn't lost a son. I'd just finally seen who he really was. That night, I made chili and called Linda over, told her to act normal. We sat in the kitchen laughing about old stories. I could feel Daniel listening from the hallway, and when I casually said something about needing to revisit that trust stuff soon, he froze. He thought his charm offensive was working. Thought I was coming around, and the next morning he made his move. He walked in holding a folder, said he'd printed it at the library, told me he'd drafted a better version of my will, said it was more streamlined, easier to understand. Offered to take me to a notary later that week. I smiled, said, "Sure, I'll look it over." Took the folder and told him I'd compare it to what I already had on file. The moment he left the room, I slipped that folder into a plastic evidence sleeve, wrote the date on it, and tucked it into a second hidden camera folder labeled Recipes. Because this wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. This was about making sure that when everything blew up, he wouldn't be able to lie his way out of it. No sob story, no spin, no gaslighting his way back into anyone's good graces. Later that evening, I pulled together everything. The camera footage, the audio clips, the photos, the fake document he gave me. I backed it all up, onto a flash drive, and Linda tucked it into her purse and took it home, just in case anything ever happened to me. And afterward, I sat on the couch, hands folded, staring at the front door, knowing Daniel would walk back in any minute, expecting me to fold, to cry, to admit I'd changed the will in a moment of confusion. But what he didn't understand is that I wasn't confused, not at all. What he couldn't even imagine was that I'd done it all on purpose. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was getting everything ready, quietly gathering proof for something serious, something Daniel couldn't talk his way out of. When he came back and asked if I'd looked at the papers, I just smiled and said, "I'm thinking about it." I saw the hope still shining in his eyes, like he thought he was winning. That was exactly what I wanted him to believe, just a little longer. The next morning felt normal, but everything Daniel did seemed like he was acting, like he was the star of a play that was already over. He tried to be nice, offering to take out the trash, fix the porch light, like doing a few chores could wipe away all the silence between us, the stolen money, and how he told me my health wasn't his problem. While he played handyman, I sat at the kitchen table, watching the hidden camera footage again and again. I saw him flipping through my trust papers, mumbling numbers that weren't his, trying to learn them like a script. Something inside me just quietly broke, not with noise or anger, but like a lock clicking shut for good. I knew it was time to stop hiding and let the truth come out. So I called my friend Linda, told her to come over around noon, and when she did, I handed her a flash drive. I told her, "Don't ask questions, just give this to your friend who helps with elder abuse." She looked at me like she wanted to make sure I was sure, but then nodded and slipped the drive into her purse like it was something precious. 2 days later, everything blew up. Linda's friend didn't just pass it on, she showed a local reporter who ran a story online called "Son Steals from Retired Nurse, Then Tries to Steal Her Will," with pictures from my footage. The story spread like wildfire on social media, with hashtags like Elder Justice and Not Your ATM. By day 3, over 1 million people had seen it, and the comments were full of support, saying things like, "She deserves justice," and "Throw him in jail." Meanwhile, Daniel was clueless, still acting like nothing had happened, until someone from his old job sent him the article. The minute he saw it, he burst into the kitchen holding his phone like it was poison, yelling, "What the hell is this?" I stayed calm and said, "The truth." He shouted that I had ruined him, that he'd lose clients and chances. But I looked him in the eye and said, "You already lost something more important. You lost your mother." For once, he had nothing to say. He stormed back to his room, slammed the door so hard a picture fell off the wall. The next day, news vans showed up across the street. Reporters called, wanting interviews. I said yes, not for attention, but because there are so many people like me out there, parents and grandparents being used and forgotten by their own kids. So I sat on my porch with a blanket over my knees, looking straight into the camera, and told my story. How I worked hospital shifts for 30 years, saved every penny, raised my son alone, trusted him completely, and how he wiped out my life. Savings with one click and walked away. When I said he told me, "Your health isn't my problem," my voice cracked, but I didn't cry. I wanted people to see strength, not weakness. That night, the story aired with my face on the screen, and Daniel's blurred out, words like "accused" and "investigation pending" next to him. By then, he'd already lost 3 consulting jobs and got a call from the state licensing board. That's when he finally understood. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about his reputation. Daniel was pacing back and forth in the living room, yelling into his phone about lawsuits and calling me all kinds of names. But I just sat quietly in my chair, feeling a calm kind of satisfaction I couldn't quite explain. I knew this wasn't just my story anymore. It was for anyone who's ever been left behind by someone they loved. There was no taking it back, no deleting the videos, and no silencing all the strangers who now knew exactly who he really was. By the end of the week, Daniel wasn't just scared, he was falling apart. He walked around the house like a trapped animal, mumbling on the phone, slamming drawers, disappearing for hours, and coming back with weak excuses about damage control. But I could see it in his eyes, the way he avoided looking at me, and jumped every time his phone buzzed. He knew something worse was coming, and it did, like a freight train. One day, a plain envelope showed up at my house, addressed to him. He ripped it open at the kitchen table, and I watched his face go pale as he read the first few lines. It wasn't a bill or a threat. It was a letter from the IRS saying they were starting an investigation into his shady business deals and money he never reported. I didn't say a word. I just sipped my tea while he stood there, blinking like a man who just realized he couldn't fly after being pushed off a building. Over the next few days, it only got worse. His old investors, probably the same ones he lied to about making big profits, started calling and texting, even showing up at the house. I watched him lie to them, promising refunds he couldn't afford, blaming fake smear campaigns and the media like he was the victim, not a man finally facing the consequences of his own choices. Then came the repo truck, big, red, and loud, rolling into the driveway like it owned the place. 2 men got out and started loading his leased Tesla. When Daniel ran outside shouting at them, they didn't even look his way. They just handed him the final notice and kept working. I stood at the window watching him argue, red-faced and frantic, while the car that stood for all his fake success was driven away like trash. He came back inside, shaking with rage, and demanded I fix everything. Like somehow I was the one who caused his downfall. That's when I finally told him, calm and steady, that I wasn't going to save him. No lawyer could undo the truth, and every lie he told had finally caught up to him. He just stared at me like I was speaking a different language because he never believed I had the right to say no and mean it. 2 days later, an eviction notice showed up, not for my home, but for the apartment he'd left without paying rent on. Now he was homeless, out of work, under IRS investigation, and being dragged all over the internet by people who once believed in him. And still, he didn't apologize. He never sat me down to say, I was wrong, I hurt you. Instead, he acted like a victim of bad luck, like the world owed him something. Meanwhile, Linda, bless her, checked on me every day. She brought groceries, helped screen my phone calls, and even set up a folder with all my legal papers in case. Daniel tried to fight back. Around that time, a local nonprofit reached out, offering legal help and a way to share my story even more. I agreed because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone watching their abuser finally face the truth. Then one night, I woke up to a loud knock at the door. There was Daniel, standing there with a duffel bag, eyes wild and voice shaking. Mom, please, you have to let me stay, just for a little while. I looked at him, really looked, and I didn't see my son anymore. I saw a man who'd never once said thank you, never shown love without expecting something back, and never believed I was anything more than a backup plan. So I said, no, Daniel, just no. I told him, no, Daniel, no yelling, no crying, just a final, full stop. He stood there frozen, like someone had punched him right in the chest. I watched him walk down the steps, knowing he had nowhere to go, no car, no money, no friends. I didn't feel happy or mean about it. It wasn't joy exactly. It was peace. The kind you get when you finally stand up to something you once thought you couldn't live without. As the night swallowed him up, I locked the door behind me and sat down to write the last update to my will. Not because I had to, but because it felt good to remind myself that I still controlled my life and everything that would come next. The morning after I turned Daniel away, I woke up earlier than usual, not because I was scared or worried, but because something inside me had shifted. It felt like a heavy stone had finally rolled off my chest. I stood quietly in the kitchen, making coffee and listening to the birds outside. For the first time in years, the silence felt calm and peaceful, not heavy or sad. As the coffee brewed, I sat at the table and looked over my final will one more time. I smiled, knowing everything was exactly where it should be. No loopholes, no back doors, no chance for Daniel to twist it for his own gain. A few hours later, I heard the mail slot click. I went to get the mail and found a single envelope with Daniel's name on it. It was from a county legal office. Even though I didn't care about his problems anymore, I opened it out of habit. Inside was a notice about a civil lawsuit against him. 3 former investors were suing him for fraud, lying, and stealing money. I folded the letter, stuck it in an envelope with a note that said, "Not at this address," and dropped it in the mailbox without thinking twice. That afternoon, Linda came over to help me pack some old things I wanted to donate. We sat on the floor folding sweaters and sorting through books. She looked at me and asked, "You okay?" I smiled and said, "I think I'm better than okay." And I really meant it. That night, I pulled my little red suitcase out of the back of the closet and started packing. Not because I was running away, but because I was finally ready to leave the house I'd lived in for 43 years. The house was full of memories that used to make me feel warm inside, but now they felt like old, dusty reminders of a chapter that had closed. I called the senior living community I'd visited a few months earlier, the one with the quiet garden, the art room, and the bingo nights that didn't feel forced. They told me a place was ready next week. I said yes, paid the deposit, and sat back on my couch feeling like I'd just dropped a heavy anchor I didn't even know I was carrying. On moving day, Linda came with me. She helped carry the few framed photos I decided to keep. One of me and her at the lake, a picture of my dog Toby from 10 years ago, and just one of Daniel from when he was 5 and still believed I was magic. We didn't say much on the drive. We just played some old Motown music on the radio. When we arrived, the staff greeted me by name and offered to carry my boxes inside. That's when I realized what starting over really felt like. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, it was steady and earned. 2 days later, a letter came to my new place. It had no return address, just my name written in Daniel's handwriting. I opened it slowly, wondering if it would be a threat, an apology, or a final plea. But all it said was, "I don't know how to fix this. I'm sorry. Daniel." I folded the letter, put it in my drawer, and left it there unread. I wasn't interested in fixing anything anymore. A week later, I changed my phone number, updated all my accounts, and made one last trip back to the old house. I handed the keys over to the realtor and stood in the empty living room, looking around one last time. I said goodbye, not just to the house, but to the woman I used to be. The woman who begged for love, waited for calls that never came, and thought forgiveness was the same as survival. Then I walked out. I closed the door behind me without a single tear or glance back. I just got into the car with Linda, rolled down the windows, and drove away. In that moment, I knew Daniel had finally learned what it really meant to lose, not just money, but a mother who loved him until he gave her no reason to stay. The next 5 years passed slowly, like turning pages in a book I wasn't rushing to finish. During that time, I lived quietly and peacefully, surrounded by people who wanted nothing from me except my company, maybe a partner for trivia night. Linda became more than a neighbor. She became family. The kind of family you choose, the kind who shows up without being asked. We laughed more than I expected we would at our age. We found joy in little things, a good blood pressure reading, a perfectly ripe peach at the market. And not once did I regret my choice. Not the will, not the story I told the public, not the day I closed that door behind me and never looked back. Every day that passed made it clearer. Walking away from Daniel was the first real act of self-respect I'd ever shown myself. Though I never heard his voice again, I occasionally saw his name pop up online, articles about fraud, business bans, and eventually a short note about a suspended license and an unpaid civil judgment. I felt nothing, not happiness, not pain, just a quiet confirmation that people rarely change unless they're forced to lose something they thought was theirs forever. In my final year, when the doctor told me the heart medicine wasn't working anymore and there were no more options, I didn't feel scared. I felt ready. I had said what needed to be said, given what I could, and left nothing behind that wasn't on purpose. When the time came, I slipped away quietly in my sleep with Linda by my side, holding my hand and softly humming a song we used to sing on car rides. I knew my story wasn't really over just because my life was. At my memorial, Linda stood before a small group, friends, nurses, aides from the care center, and a few neighbors who remembered my story. She read from a letter I'd written 2 years before, sealed and marked only if he shows up. And sure enough, Daniel showed up. Late, alone, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit anymore. He stood quietly at the back, maybe hoping for forgiveness, or just curious about what scraps I might have left behind. Linda read the letter slowly, word for word, to my son Daniel. By the time you hear this, I'll be gone. Maybe that's the only reason you came. But I want you to understand this clearly. I loved you with every part of me until you showed me not to. I gave you everything I had, and even more. When I needed you the most, you taught me what abandonment really feels like. You didn't just take money, you took trust, safety, and pride. I gave you chances, not once, but over and over, until it drained me completely. So this house, this small legacy, it's not yours. I gave it to someone who stayed, someone who fed me when I couldn't stand, someone who never asked for anything. In return, that is love, that is family, and that's why this will stays where it belongs. When Linda finished reading, Daniel didn't argue, shout, or cry. He just turned and walked away, shoulders hunched, a man who finally understood what losing everything truly means. Linda handed the letter to the attorney to be filed with my estate, then hugged me, or maybe just the memory of me, and smiled softly. She said she got the last word, just like she planned. In that quiet room, filled with gentle smiles and warm eyes, my story ended, not with anger or revenge, but with peace, dignity, and the quiet victory of a woman who finally chose herself.